So I'm Harry Gatjens. I've been a longtime resident of Edmonds. I grew up in Glenwood. The house next door to me when I was growing up was a chicken farm. Now it's a Kentucky Fried Chicken, so the chickens have still stayed there. They're a slightly different state of being. I went to Memorial High School. I went to the University of Washington. I live up in the Seaview area. And 22 years ago, I got involved with some friends who were doing a television show about local political issues. We had local issues, worldwide issues, and we had a lot of interesting people on as guests. We had the governor on, we had vice presidential candidates on the show, and I always kept saying, well, let's do something about Edmonds. And they said, well, we don't have anything interesting going on in Edmonds. And then the Skipper's deal, which I think the bulk of you still kind of remember, came in, and the mayor had a fit about it. And I said, okay, here's something that's interesting we can talk about Edmonds. But we changed the issue more from just the Skipper's project in Edmonds, but how do cities this was at 2008, 2009, when they don't have enough money to pay for the streets or to pay the police, how do they deal with their long-term infrastructure issues? You know? And so he did a very good job, and then he encouraged me to be a little more involved, and so I got involved, and I served on a number of committees on your levy committee, and I served on the Citizens Technology Advisory Board. I started coming to the city council meetings, and some of you may or may not like me because I write articles about what I think that happens in the city council meetings. But from doing that, I've become involved in what goes on in city government. And well, none of you probably love me. All of you who've either come to a coffee with Harry or have had discussions with me see that while I may not agree with you about certain things, I listen. I try to reason out the right answer. And there's some things I know really well and some things I don't know really well. And so it's very important to listen very well. And it's very important to me to work with the other people on the council. You know, it's not about establishing a fiefdom for Harry that, you know, I'm running this part of the council. It's the city council's function to me is to help lead the direction for where the city's heading, and then to let the city personnel and the citizens do what they need to do to get where they want to get. And so I try and get diverse opinions from people on what they want to do. I try to give you guys opinions on what I think ought to be done. And I always never have anything motivating me other than just the best interest of all the citizens of the city. I don't have any special interests that want to build tall buildings or want to build parks, or, you know, every issue to me is sort of like open. Let's see what the arguments are, and then make the right decision. And so that's why I've applied, and I think I'd work well with you guys. And I try to contribute to an era of reconciliation where, rather than fighting, we can talk about how can we make these things happen.
Okay, Ms. Bloom.
All right. So if staff proposed a study that used significant public funds, but no information was provided beyond the title, what steps would you take to get the information necessary to vote whether or not to seek funding for the study?
Well, I would hope that before the meeting, the staff would give us more information than just what the study is about. I think I would try to make it a more of a constant relationship between staff and the council, that those things don't happen, that we have a dialogue. I don't think you necessarily want the council members calling staff all the time and get involved in their day-to-day workload, but I think you should develop a relationship with the staff that if you don't understand what they're talking about, you can call and say, can you help me figure this one out? And I guess that becomes between the mayor and the staff, whether they're willing to agree to that. But I think if you do it in a non-confrontational, non-challenging manner, everybody appreciates having you ask them what their opinion is. And so I hope they would give you that information.
Thank you.
Ms. Fraley-Winnelis?
Thanks for coming and doing this again, Harry. We all appreciate it. As you know, there always has been and will continue to be issues about building heights in Edmonds. I'm interested in knowing if you would consider some compromise language allowing for a few feet of building heights in the downtown, and are you open to compromise in some cases on building heights?
Well, the council has talked the last 2 years about, development agreements and things like that, and I'm not totally opposed to that, but I'm also not saying let's just raise all the building heights. But if you look downtown, there are some buildings that aren't at the height limit that are really kind of shabby looking buildings, and if there's something you do to encourage those people to upgrade those buildings, and I don't know, I'd propose like a huge building increase, but if there's something they could do that adds to the appeal to the building, that maybe means you let it go up a foot or two, I would consider it. But again, once you start to do that, you got sort of the never-ending slope of potential problems. So it'd have to be really well presented, really well thought out, and an exception would have to be made if you can, which we'll ask the attorney about, can you do that on a case-by-case basis? But I'm generally not in favor of just rewriting the building heights code, but I would be open to listening to suggestions.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question than I asked other people, because you've already answered my question. In your application, you stated that you've attended council meetings for the past 5 years, probably in the front row.
Five plus or minus, yes.
Fine. So do you have any observations that you would like to share from your point of view?
Well, the one thing I see is I think there's a lot of confrontational things amongst the council meetings, whether it be between council members or council with staff or council with people making presentations. And I think it's fine to disagree with people, but I think it really needs to be civil. It needs to be very civil. And like I said, each of you I don't agree with, but I don't think we ever get in a yelling match or we ever say, look, you're an idiot. I try to explain my position and you try to explain your position. And I think by doing that, we can both be reasonable. I bring that up from my coffees with Harry, which I think most of all you've been to, where I invite the 2 candidates applying for a position to come just talk to the citizens. And sometimes I agree with one of the candidates and sometimes I don't, but we've always had a pretty good open meeting where both sides get to speak out and the citizens get to get the answers they want. And I just think that should be more than just at a coffee with Harry. That should be the way all interaction between the council, other council members, members of the public, and members of the city staff work.
Thank you.
Ms. Petzo?
My questions are based on the photograph. There's a copy right in front of you. It's a relatively new building on Edmonds Way, and the small photo on the top right is a close-up of some of the vacant retail space and the sign advertising the vacancy, and the inserted photo on the bottom right is just a close-up of the sandwich board sign directing people to the parking behind the building. My question for you is, does this building embody your vision for Edmonds? Why or why not?
Well, if I remember this was the building, I don't know what the side street is, but it's a big development that's opened up a year or 2 years ago. Fairly tall building, fairly tall up to the sidewalk. And I think design standards probably should have been implemented that didn't let it be a block that goes right up to the sidewalk, and then you look up the behemoth. I haven't been to the back of the building. Maybe there's some ways behind the building that you can add some terracing or texturing or something. I wouldn't say it's an awful building, but it wouldn't be my vision of what the rest of Edmonds would look like. And I think it's a lot of people who are concerned about the look of Edmonds are concerned about the look of Edmonds downtown. And I don't think it would be an appropriate building to have downtown where it's located, where there's a big hill behind it. There's not a lot of businesses on both sides of it. It might work, but again, it wouldn't be my first choice on how you do it.
Thanks.
Mr. Peterson?
Thanks, Harry. You've touched on this, but I'll go with this anyway. Given the recent tensions that have mounted between the administration and the city council, what specifically would you do to ensure there's a positive and productive relationship between the staff and the council in order to best serve the citizens of Edmonds?
Well, I already have a pretty good relationship with most of the members of staff, and so on a personal level, I think that's not a big issue, but I do think dealing with council, people get tied up in their own individual issue, and they want to argue with people rather than just try to figure out how we can fix it. And one thing I was thinking about doing was, and I don't know if the mayor will let you do it, I don't know if the council's allowed to do it, but, you know, try to meet with the directors or the city employees on a fairly regular basis saying, you people are doing the best you can for the city. What can we as the council do to help you do your job better, to help you get things accomplished for the citizens of Edmonds? That is what they're really after. And I'm taking this from a sports analogy, which really is, it's bad because it's about the Baltimore Colts in the early 1960s. It has nothing to do with the Seahawks. But Johnny Unitas, who was considered one of the best quarterbacks of the time, he'd go into he'd go into a huddle, and he'd ask the players, okay, who needs help? What can we do to help you? And I think it'd be nice if the council could have that kind of relationship with the staff, that what help do you need and how can we help you do it? And I think if you do that, they'll respect you enough that when there's an issue, they won't get in a fight with you. They'll say, okay, the council's trying to help me. Now, how can I help them understand what we're trying to do better, or how can I listen to what they're saying better?
Great, thank you.
Harry, you know, I'm always been a proponent of budgeting by priorities.
Yes.
And so would you like to give me your opinion about that process, if you think it's a good thing to move towards, or if it's a gimmick, or you think you like the way the budgeting process is?
I think the budgeting process the last year worked better than it has in the past, and the year before it worked better than it had before that. So I think generally the budgeting process is improving. But there's a lot of people who are concerned that it's sort of like budget by last year plus, without really thinking about the long-term goals of the city. And the city has come up with a strategic plan, and I think the budget needs to try to reflect what wants to be done with the strategic plan. The budgeting by priority system that was outlined to me is pretty cumbersome, and it would be nice if you could work that way, but I don't think you're going to get there in a year or 2 years. But I think you could put together some panels of people to help at least identify the areas where we should concentrate in our efforts and our resources. And then once you start doing that, you see a little bit of progress each year, and ultimately you end up with a budgeting priority system.
Ms. Bloom, we have one more question time for it?
Okay, do you believe the city gets sufficient citizen input regarding major projects such as Five Corners and the Sunset Walkway in advance of applying for grant funding, and why or why not?
I don't think you'll ever say the city has enough public input before they decide to do something like that. And part of the problem you run into is the city staff is always searching for grants. And if there's a potential grant coming up that would affect Five Corners or the Sunset Walkway or something like that, in order to apply for it, there isn't really time to do a huge presentation to the citizens about what's going on. But I think the city departments should have a better idea of what's going on with the citizens' minds, and they should try as quickly as they can to say, okay, well, we have the potential for this grant. What I don't like is when we get a $400,000 grant, and then all of a sudden citizens say, well, I don't really think we should do that. And the city comes back and says, well, we've already gotten this grant. If we don't carry it forward, we're going to have to pay the $400,000 back. And if we continue to do it, it's still only going to cost us $400,000. It kind of backs the citizens and the city into doing things that I'm not sure it's necessarily well thought out. So I would say no, but I don't know the system to fix it yet.
Thank you.
And believe it or not,
That's my time.
perfect timing.
Okay.